Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, December 13th, 2024. Wow, is it really the 13th? Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, what is spookier as a content creator than facing your own feedback? That seems fitting. So it's Feedback Friday the 13th, where we will get your feedback from the week. Plus, we will talk about saving labor on the farm and offer a crop planning approach. So let's do it. All right, so we made it to Friday, which is usually the case, but you know what we also have done, team? We made it to the 50th episode of this show. What's wild about that is, one, you all haven't made me stop yet, so that's neat. But two, I just did a word count on the notes I have that I've used for this show up until this point, and it's over 70,000 words. To put that in context, that's the equivalent of a 280-page book. So effectively, at that pace, this show is a free audiobook every 3 months, which is pretty cool. Anyway, I appreciate you all listening, and it looks like we may be able to bring on a producer by the spring at the rate we're growing on the Patreon page and in general. So that's awesome. If you are in the Central Kentucky area already and have some audio visual experience, be on the lookout because we will be posting the job in the new year at some point. That will enable me to do more with this show and also more on my farm to talk about for the show, because right now it's all me pumping out free audiobooks like you do. Speaking of books, but of the currently non-audio variety, Dan Brisebois' book, The Seed Farmer, has officially arrived, and it is so cool. There are just a million pictures in here, too. I can't even imagine the amount of organization it took to really get this thing together. So props to Dan, and congratulations to him. And pick up a copy of The Seed Farmer from no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. It's double cool. All right, so it's Friday, and that means we take a look back at the week and hear what you all have to say on the various topics of conversation. On Monday, we discussed a few things, from the lack of science around KNF and biodynamics and Jadam to also watermelon profitability. And I really liked this comment from Patreon member Tom Beatty, who said, quote, just listened to the watermelon financial feasibility discussion in the December 9th show and had to come here to say that I absolutely hunger for that type of information. So thank you. I find that most of the questions floating around in my head while listening to your podcast network deal with the dollars and cents of the business being featured. How much does a composter need to make from tipping fees? What is the correct crop layout, succession, and timing for a farmer to maximize profits from his property? How do these businesses find customers? How do they find raw inputs? I'm sure it's because I'm absolutely eaten up with the idea of somehow starting an agricultural or ag-adjacent business, and this information seems hardest to come by. So again, thank you for including it in the show, and know that when you're wondering, is this interesting to anyone? The answer is yes, it's interesting to me, end quote. Yeah, thanks, Tom, and very good to know, and I certainly had some good feedback to that extent on that episode. Now, I can't turn every subject into dollars and cents without making this thing a slog to listen to, but it is good to know that I can include more of it without kicking off nap time prematurely for everyone. In fact, naps were part of the talk on Tuesdays, and obviously I'm getting better at segues after 50 episodes, but naps were part of the topic on Tuesday, as was the idea and history of daylight saving. Read through those comments. It's very interesting because people really are divided. Some prefer daylight saving and some prefer standard time. Some feel like, love it or hate it, the time change is the only rational option. One comment I like was from YouTube user SCW6G, probably not their real name, who wrote, quote, let's remember that 2 U.S. states at least don't subscribe to daylight saving time at all, Arizona and Hawaii. And this person says they were born and raised in Hawaii and now live in Arizona themselves, never moving the clocks any kind of way. Having lived more than 60 years now in one or the other of these states, I must say the obvious. Actual, real, unaltered time works awesome. Really, it needs no improvement. So my vote is for real time everywhere. So annoying to have to remember whether to adjust or not when traveling to neighboring states. Well, not in Hawaii. End quote. Yeah, it can be done because it is being done. And I also saw comments that were like, why not just live by the sun? Who cares what time it is? Well, it's a good question, but the problem with that is that the rest of the world cares what time it is. Sure, you can gear your own work and day around the sun, but if the kids have to be at school at a certain time or your chiropractor appointment is in the morning that week, it kind of matters what time you're on. Lots of people endorsed my half-hour time change too, just saying. Okay, some people didn't like it, but a lot of people liked it. Anyway, Wednesday was when we talked about wood chips, and well, there's a lot to say about wood chips in the garden, but one thing that comes up that needs to come up more when we're talking about wood chips is what at Stephen Hatcher 7700 touched on in their comment, that basically wood chips get, quote, mixed into the lettuce leaves, and now we're pulling out wood chips from our salad mix during harvest, post-harvest in the bubbler, after spin drying, during bagging, wood chips everywhere. Then there's a big rain and the wood chips float into the lettuce. By into the lettuce, I mean into the lettuce. Wood chips on our farm are now solely a composting material, end quote. Yeah, for me, wood chips are up there with leaves in terms of using them around salad mixes. That is to say, we no longer do it because I would rather clean anything out of my salad mix than shards of woods or leaves. It's a big old pain. For me, they are fine in the paths, but I too just prefer them in the compost pile where they rule. They really do rule in the compost pile. And then, of course, yesterday we talked about bird flu, among other things, but this comment from someone named Richard stood out. Quote, my sister literally has a sick turkey in her house right this minute with her children and dogs and cat and hedgehog. To her, her chickens and ducks and turkeys aren't livestock but pets. There's nothing I can say to her to convince her that this is a bad idea. She doesn't listen to her older brother about anything. The next pandemic could start in my sister's house, end quote. I don't really know what to say about that. I remember a few years ago, there was actually a small campaign to get people to stop snuggling and kissing their chickens because there was a huge salmonella outbreak among backyard flock owners. The CDC literally had to issue a statement about it. There are benefits to living around more animals for immune systems, but just because a little is good does not make a lot better. So by all means, feel free to love your farm animals, but just, be smart about it, especially poultry, and no sick poultry inside of your house. Cool? Cool. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get a question about labor-saving tips and tricks. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op in Cleveland, Ohio, making NOP-compliant living soils for organic growers. Everything from Tilth is compost-based, and they divert around 4,000 tons of food scraps from landfills each year. I have used Tilth Soil for several years now for my plant starts. I love the results. I get consistent germination and consistent growth, plus excellent customer support. It's a lovably nerdy cast of folks who run Tilth. So, start your season with excellent germination and strong transplants. Check out Tilth's pre-sale pricing for the 2025 season at tilthsoil.com. That's tilthsoil.com, and click Farmers. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider joining the nearly 850 people who support it over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, and I'll even answer your question like a personal consultation live on air. Sweet. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Joe Naaman Sessions, whose question you might remember I already answered this week. That was a comment about dirty hats, and but what I did not realize is that Joe actually asked a follow-up question on that thread. Patreon doesn't really alert me very well when there are follow-up questions, so my apologies to Joe and anyone else who's asked one that maybe I've missed. Joe's actual question was, quote, I take that back. I do have a question after watching today's episode on ASP, which for the listener, that acronym stands for Aerated Static Pile, but I believe should actually be SAP because it sounds better phonetically to say Static Aerated Pile. But anyway, back to Joe's question. I do have a question after watching today's episode on ASP, composting, but it has nothing to do with composting and everything to do with my above joke about labor saving. I am going whole hog, expanding from 3,500 square feet to half an acre next year as my 40th birthday present to myself. Unfortunately, I don't have the time or situation to work a full season on a farm, though I did volunteer on two over a decade ago. What are your best tips and tricks for labor saving or efficiency boosting on the farm? Things you'd correct an employee on if you saw it, like rubber banding the tops, not roots for bunches, using a board to roll a wheelbarrow to the top of the compost pile rather than forking it, etc. Looking to get in the next third of my life doing this, so hit me with your best shot. So I am still doing this crazy thing called farming in 20 years, end quote. So this is a fun topic, and I'm not sure I have a ton of more hyper-specific examples like you mentioned there that we do here on the farm. Sometimes those things are improvised and they happen organically, like using a ramp to pile a compost pile by hand. Generally speaking, I spent much of my life in the restaurant industry, and one thing you can learn working in that environment is that you will never survive if you travel with empty hands. This goes for the front of the house, so servers and bussers, as well as the back of the house. If you are moving, you should have something in your hands. In kitchens, you are usually taking stuff to the dish tank or back to the cooler. On a farm, maybe you are cleaning up tools or carrying harvested produce or carrying trays that you need to plant or empty trays that you've already planted back and forth from the greenhouse. Another big time saver, and this is one that makes me think of the late, great Chris Blanchard, so shout outs to him and to the Farmer to Farmer podcast, which is still relevant and still the GOAT. So go find episodes of that podcast if you can. But another big time saver is just wheels. So that would be wheelbarrows, which I have fallen in love with having a wheelbarrow with 2 wheels over one wheel after a decade of the dang thing tipping over and freeing itself of its contents. So yes, wheelbarrows, carts, hand trucks, and so on, just wheels everywhere. They just make everything easier. So let's say I need to seed a bed. I will load the wheelbarrow up with everything I could possibly need: amendments, rakes, hoes, seeders, seeds, anything that I might forget and come back for, because it takes less time to put tools I didn't use away than to come all the way back to the shed and get the tools I forgot. I would love to have stations of tools all over the farm, and I know people say it pays for itself in steps, but I don't think our farm is big enough for us to, for instance, own 2 gritters at $400 a piece, or a bunch of $100 rakes or hoes. As farmers, we often talk ourselves into new tools, saying things like, well, that's just one extra bed of lettuce I have to sell or whatever. But the reality is that you can only do that so many times before you are like 100 beds of lettuce in debt to the farm tools. Anyway, if you can place your tools closer to where you need them so you never have to travel far, that's great. That's ideal maybe. Otherwise, the wheelbarrow works for me. One of the things I think permaculture has done well is nailed down farm design and layout, which an efficiently designed farm can play a major role in saving time and energy. Even hiring an experienced, emphasis on experienced, permaculture design person to help work out the layout could be really beneficial, or perhaps just taking a design course yourself. There's probably a clever phrase for how much time that taking time to make a good plan can save you, because what I just said was not it. That was very clumsy. But sometimes just taking the requisite time to lay out your day and your week, just exact your plan for what you're going to do, can save a lot of time wandering around, wondering what you should be working on in that moment. Make a list and stick to the list. You will never get everything done on a farm anyway, but you will also never get anything done if you were just trying to do everything. Still not a great phase, but you get the idea. In soccer coaching, we call it squirrel coaching, where you are just always trying to work on the things that you see the players not doing well that week or that previous game, instead of working towards a specific goal throughout the length of the season. Same sort of thing applies to farming. Don't squirrel farm. Set a plan, prioritize harvesting and planting, go from there. I've said this before, but I think I first heard it from maybe J.M. Fortier and Madeleine Desroches, who said, give yourself a time you have to be done by every day. Like, basically, I stop at X hour every single day, which for us is like 4 p.m. Give yourself a set number of hours to do your farm work in. Nothing will light a flame under you and force you to root out inefficiencies quite like time limits. I mean, just watch Lego Masters. They get an epic Lego project done in 8 or 10 hours or whatever, because that's the amount of time that they have, not because that's the amount of time it would normally take. Can you tell I have kids? I have kids, but also Will Arnett rules. The show's great. Anyway, I hope that got the wheels turning, literally and figuratively, I suppose. I'll share more specific time savers as they come up, of course. All right, one more quick show nap, and then when we come back, a simple crop planting strategy. Be right back. All right, so one thing that has been on my mind to talk about is to start sprinkling in some crop planting advice. And so I thought I would give the best piece of advice I received as a new grower that helped a lot, especially when we were doing a CSA. Basically, let's say that next year you hope to do 20 or 30 weeks of either CSA shares or the farmer's market, but it could also just be 20 or 30 weeks of what you hope to harvest for your family. Doesn't matter the goal. It's the same approach. Start by making a reasonable list of what you would like each of those weeks. So for instance, let's say that the week of July 7th, that's a Monday in 2025, I would like to have the following crops: white onions, cherry tomatoes, lettuce, potatoes, peppers, cilantro, garlic, and yellow summer squash. Okay, that's a nice summer market table or CSA share for July here in Kentucky. CSA just meaning a farm subscription where customers get a share of your produce every week for a given period of time. And 8 to 10 items is usually what we would go for, but CSA design is a whole other conversation, so we'll save that. But I would start by working my way back on each of those crops and figure out what date I would need to plant each one. I will do a segment soon on understanding days to maturity and how to know when to plant what, but it's obviously good to ultimately put all of this in a spreadsheet so you can continuously dial it in over the years. I would figure out when I needed to plant everything that I wanted to be harvesting by that date, working backwards from each week. I would then figure out how much of each crop I wanted to have available. So let's say I want to have, well, let's do an easy one to start. Let's say I want to have 2 large white onions for that week per share, and I have 50 CSA shares. I will need to have 100 onions for each week, 2 onions per share times 50 shares. Remember though, that's just for a single week. So you will have to do this for every week in every crop. And maybe in the end, you see that you want to have white onions for a total of 5 weeks, meaning you will need 500 white onions at least by that period. So you will set aside space to grow at least 500 onions. And of course, if all you have space for is 400 large white onions, then you change your plan accordingly. And then that part of your crop plan is done. I also love to have extra storage crops like potatoes, onions, shallots, and garlic, just in case one of my planned crops doesn't work out. And pro tip, you can generally find yields in seed catalogs, and that's a great starting point. Just start with those and then adjust once you have your own numbers. They won't always be accurate, so account for that a little bit of extra loss for the first couple of years. Now, I've said this before, but some crops like zucchini and squash will start coming and not stop coming. It's like that Bare Naked Lady song, but instead of years, it's zucchini. But anyway, be prepared to have a plan to break up those harvests with something else so as not to overwhelm customers, like just squash every week for 8 weeks, but also have a plan of where you are going to send that extra squash on those weeks you don't need it. For us, we always did 2 weeks of squash, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks of squash, 2 weeks off, and then we go to a different crop. Maybe a different kind of crop, squash, maybe zucchini, maybe patty pan, something like that. Again, just take notes and don't expect to knock it out of the park your first few seasons. Maybe as I get my plan together for next season, I can start sharing that with you Patreon folks, because it will be a new plan for a new season, which is going to be part of my big Christmas week break. That's what I'm going to be doing, is working on my garden plan. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for now. Let me know your favorite crop planting tricks, and I wish you all a happy weekend. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or The Seed Farmer. Shouts to Dan Brisebois at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers, and to everyone who makes music for Epidemic Sound. Really appreciate you all. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of December, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Nathan, Ayla, and Songhaven Farm. This group was out on a private helicopter ride, and they were over, they were in Missouri, and the helicopter ran out of fuel, and they were able to land it safely. But then they realized, like, oh man, we are like stuck in the woods. And they were there for several hours before somebody was like, oh wait, never mind, we have cell phones. I mean, it was a little anticlimactic, but I think the camera work really made this particular story stand out. It's very compelling. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Thanks for watching. We'll see you Monday.